Commander Marcus Chen descends through Vethara Prime's atmosphere in a sleek, angular shuttle designed for planetary reconnaissance. The descent is routine standard approach vectors, predictable deceleration curves, yet Marcus finds his pulse quickening as the planet's surface resolves beneath the dissipating clouds. He has spent the last 3 years aboard New Haven Station, orbiting this world like a ghost trapped between existence and void, and now, finally, he is about to make contact with the ground. The irony of his situation has never escaped him. He is humanity's representative to an alien civilization, yet he barely qualifies as human himself in the eyes of his own species. He is the sole surviving male among nearly 2,000 women, a statistical anomaly that transformed him from an ordinary colonial administrator into something between a symbol and a specimen. The reactor failure that claimed the lives of his fellow male colonists occurred during the depths of cryosleep, in that liminal space where consciousness does not exist, and the body becomes merely inert matter waiting to be reanimated. Marcus had been undergoing emergency maintenance on his pod systems check that saved his life by removing him from the chain of cascade failures that swept through the male cryo bay like a merciless plague. When he emerged from suspension to a colony where he was the only man among 20 centuries of women, he discovered that survival had brought not relief, but a peculiar form of torture. Women who had lost husbands, brothers, sons, and lovers regarded him with an aching mixture of gratitude and resentment. Scientists saw him as a genetic repository whose reproductive potential might be essential to humanity's future on this alien world. Administrators viewed him as a potential flashpoint for conflict and social disruption. Religious groups debated his symbolic significance in philosophical frameworks that made him deeply uncomfortable. To escape this pressure and fulfill his actual professional purpose, establishing first contact with an alien civilization, Marcus volunteered for the initial deep planetary expedition. The colony's leadership accepted his proposal with unseemly eagerness, perhaps relieved to remove the source of so much complicated emotion from their immediate social ecosystem. Now, as his shuttle touches down in a clearing approximately 2 kilometers from detected veteran settlements, Marcus experiences something unexpected: liberation. Here, on an alien world, he is simply a human being, freed from the burden of his singular maleness by the vast indifference of an alien landscape. His equipment is both minimal and sophisticated, the result of careful consideration about what an ambassador should carry when descending into complete uncertainty. The translation matrix occupies a space no larger than his hand, powered by quantum processors capable of analyzing and interpreting languages based on acoustic patterns, electromagnetic emissions, and chemical compositions. A medical kit capable of scanning and analyzing alien biochemistry, rest-side pharmaceutical modules that can synthesize treatments for 1,000 conditions he has never encountered. Recording devices designed to capture data without being intrusive passive sensors, rather than active scanners, are distributed throughout his suit and equipment pack. Marcus has studied every scrap of satellite imagery, every fragment of linguistic analysis the remote drones could gather during their brief operational windows before the veterans took them down with apparent effortlessness. He carries theoretical frameworks for understanding non-human cognition, papers on xenopsology, and academic papers on the cultural development of species that have not experienced sexual reproduction. Yet as Marcus steps out of the shuttle and the airlock hisses open, releasing him into Vethara Prime's atmosphere, all his training feels simultaneously essential and catastrophically inadequate. The air tastes like minerals and electricity, cool and vital, carrying scents that his nose cannot quite categorize. The trees tower above him in arrangements that seem almost deliberately chaotic, structures that defy the geometric precision of Earth's forests, reaching upward in spirals and curved arcs that suggest either botanical randomness or an intentional aesthetics based on principles entirely foreign to human understanding. Their bark shifts through subtle gradients of purple, emerald, and a color that exists somewhere between blue and ultraviolet, as if the very photons bouncing off the trees cannot decide what wavelength they should travel at. Marcus activates his suit's environmental systems, ensuring that the filtration units work properly to process the alien atmosphere. His instruments confirm what the basic analysis already suggested. The air is breathable for a human, assuming he can tolerate elevated levels of compounds his scanner identifies as related to ammonia and sulfur. The humidity is extraordinary, nearly 90%, and the temperature hovers just above what humans would consider comfortable. The forest itself be first antagonist, not through malice, but through sheer alienness. The ecosystem operates on principles that challenge his understanding at a fundamental level. Strange creatures that defy easy classification branches, their bodies translucent or covered in patterns that seem to shift and shimmer when Marcus tries to focus directly on them. Some creatures hover impossibly in midair, defying what he understands about gravity and wing mechanics. Others seem to exist as collections of semi-autonomous floating spheres that move in coordinated formations and emit sounds that his translation matrix registers as potentially linguistic. The ground beneath his feet releases spores with each step, visible clouds of particulate matter that drift upward and catch the filtered sunlight in prismatic cascades. His suit's filters work overtime to process these particles, cataloging their chemical composition and biological signatures. Marcus's biometric systems register a slight elevation in his cortisol levels, his body's way of acknowledging that he is far outside any evolutionary context it was designed for. He pushes the concern aside and focuses on his mission parameters. He knows from the satellite imagery that the Vetherans inhabit this forest. The data shows settlements, structures, and clear signs of civilization distributed across the landscape in patterns that suggest either random distribution or organization according to principles Marcus has not yet deciphered. After approximately 3 hours of careful navigation through the forest, moving slowly and deliberately, trying to minimize his impact on the environment while maximizing his opportunities to gather data, Marcus discovers a river. The water glows faintly, as if phosphorescence exists suspended within its depths, and as Marcus kneels to examine it more closely, he realizes with a start that the light patterns are not random. They pulse in rhythmic cycles, brighten and dim in sequences that suggest intentionality. The water itself is warm, almost hot, and Marcus's chemical scanner begins to analyze its composition. Mineral-rich, yes, but also containing elements his instruments cannot immediately identify. His translation matrix begins to detect patterns in the electromagnetic emissions the water produces, oscillating waves that carry structure and meaning. They are rhythmic and intentional, possibly linguistic, possibly something more fundamental, perhaps a language written in the language of physics itself. Marcus extends his recording device toward the water's glowing surface, watching as the light patterns seem to accelerate and intensify. His instruments begin capturing data frantically, processing information faster than his conscious mind can follow. The sound arrives before the image does. A sensation of vibration traveling through his suit, felt more than heard. Then he hears them, voices. Not human voices, but something close enough to trigger his language recognition and protocols. They are laughing, at least. His AI interprets the sound as laughter, complex harmonic structures that convey something beyond mere acoustic novelty. The voices are approaching quickly, moving through the forest with a grace that speaks of deep familiarity with the environment. The Vetherans emerge from the forest like a tide of twilight made manifest. As they step from between the trees and crystalline structure, Marcus's first comprehensive observation confirms what the expedition theorists have speculated about but never directly confirmed. The species, or at least, the population, exhibits predominantly feminine characteristics across every individual that approaches. There are approximately 200 of them, arranged in a formation that seems almost choreographed, moving with a synchronization that suggests either hive mind consciousness or a level of cultural coordination that exceeds anything Marcus has experienced in human societies. Their bodies are elegant but powerful, standing nearly 7 feet tall on average, their proportions suggesting a species that evolved under gravity conditions slightly higher than Earth standard. Their skin appears to be a living canvas of light and color, capable of absorbing and reflecting the forest's bioluminescence in patterns that shift as Marcus watches. The coloration ranges from deep indigo to pale silver, with some individuals displaying patterns that seem to respond to their emotional states, or perhaps to the presence of the stranger in their midst. Their features are fine-boned and delicate, with high cheekbones and smooth foreheads, unmarked by any ridge or protrusion. Yet this delicate appearance belies observable musculature that suggests strength and endurance that Marcus's human frame could not match, even accounting for his military training and physical conditioning. The veterans wear garments that appear to be woven from the forest itself, materials that integrate seamlessly with their bodies, as if the clothing and the wearer exist as a unified organism rather than separate entities connected by the mechanics of wearing. Some garments seem to be living plants, their fibers still photosynthesizing, still processing nutrients from some internal source. Others appear to be crystalline, grown rather than woven, transparent in some places and opaque in others, creating patterns that seem to convey information or perhaps status. Their eyes are the most striking feature, large and multifaceted, constructed according to principles that suggest a visual spectrum far beyond the narrow band of light that human eyes perceive. These eyes seem to contain depth that physics alone cannot explain, as if they are windows into dimensions that Marcus's mind is not equipped to fully process. More striking still is their initial silence. After that moment of laughter, the approaching veterans halt their advance and enter a state of profound quiet. The forest around them seems to hold its breath. 200 beings, capable of communication and apparent coordination, choose to observe the stranger in their environment without verbal announcement. Marcus senses immediately that he is being assessed on levels that transcend simple visual inspection. Their multifaceted eyes focus on him with an intensity that he can feel like physical pressure, and his instruments begin detecting electromagnetic emissions from their bodies at wavelengths that suggest active scanning, perhaps a form of sensory perception that combines visual observation with something biological, sonar, or electromagnetic sensitivity. Sci-Fi, though Marcus does not yet know this name, or that it will become so integral to his experience, on this world steps forward from the assembled crowd. She is taller than the others by perhaps a foot, her skin displaying a deeper saturation of color, and her bearing suggests authority, age, or perhaps both. Her garments are far more elaborate than those of her companions, woven with materials that seem to shift between states of matter, sometimes solid and crystalline, sometimes flowing like liquid, sometimes dispersing like gas before reconsolidating. She carries no weapons that Marcus can detect, yet he senses immediately that she is the focal point of power within this group. Seraphil's voice cuts through the ambient sound with striking clarity, and when she speaks, Marcus hears something remarkable. Her words are almost comprehensible even before his translation matrix finishes processing them. "You are not veteran," she states, her voice carrying harmonics that suggest layered meaning beneath the simple acoustic content. "Your configuration suggests otherness. Your emissions are discordant." Behind her, the assembled crowd stirs with what Marcus can only interpret as a mixture of excitement and alarm. Hands gesture toward him, and a cacophony of overlapping voices erupts, hundreds of questions, observations, and exclamations occurring simultaneously, creating a symphony of curiosity that nearly overwhelms his translation matrix's processing capacity. Marcus forces calm into his voice, drawing upon 3 years of diplomatic training, and the knowledge that this moment, whatever it becomes, will shape human-veteran relations for generations to come. "I am Marcus Chen," he announces, speaking slowly and deliberately, enunciating each word with careful precision. "I am human, from the planet Earth. I come as a representative of humanity to establish peaceful contact with the veteran people." The words simultaneously profound and absurdly inadequate, almost laughable given the immensity of the moment and the scale of the encounter occurring. Yet he speaks them with the careful enunciation and respectful tone that his diplomatic training has ingrained into his being, like muscle memory for communication. The veteran's reaction is immediate and visceral. The crowd seems to physically recoil, their bodies tensing, and Marcus's threat assessment systems begin alerting him to potential danger. But Seraphil raises a hand, and silence returns with an authority that suggests her command transcends mere social convention. She leans closer to Marcus, studying him with an intensity that makes his skin crawl beneath his suit. He catches the scent of something floral and mineral, intoxicating and alien, carried on her breath, or perhaps released through her skin as some form of pheromonal communication. "You are male," Seraphel says, and her words are not questions but statements of profound significance that seem to vibrate through the very fabric of reality around them. The translation matrix highlights the emotional subtext beneath the acoustic surface: wonder, recognition, something almost like longing. Behind her, the crowd reacts with what might be gasps or indrawn breaths. They seem to collectively hold their breath, as if the very atmosphere of the planet has paused to acknowledge the significance of this moment. "I am," Marcus affirms carefully, uncertain where this line of inquiry is leading but aware that his affirmative answer triggered something fundamental in the Vetheran response patterns. "None of us has seen a male before," Seraphel continues, and her voice carries harmonics of certainty mixed with something that might be sorrow or regret. "Not in 3,000 years of our recorded history. Not in the ancient texts. Not in cultural memory. Not in the deepest archives of our civilization. We have no males. Our species is entirely female. We have existed, since the great catastrophe, without your kind." The weight of her words settles over Marcus like a physical force, pressing down on him with implications that cascade through his consciousness like falling dominoes. His training immediately recognizes significance of what he is hearing. If the Vetheran species is entirely or predominantly female, and if they have maintained a stable civilization for 3,000 years without males, then the question of reproduction becomes absolutely central to understanding their species. He realizes with a mixture of relief and profound unease that he may have stumbled upon the single most important fact of Vetheran civilization. Revelation that will immediately recontextualize every assumption about their social structure, their evolutionary history, and their biological imperatives. "I don't understand," Marcus says, and he speaks truthfully, though he suspects he understands all too well. "Are you saying there are no males among your people? No males of your species, anywhere at all?" The crowd erupts into sounds that Marcus's translation matrix struggles to fully categorize. Some expressions carry what might be profound sorrow or mourning. Others convey fascination bordering on obsession. Still others carry something that might be hunger or need or desire, emotional states that Marcus's human psychology finds difficult to fully comprehend. The elder raises her hand once more and silence returns, though it feels thinner now, more fragile, as if the equilibrium that existed moments before has been fundamentally disrupted. "For as long as our history extends, our people have existed only as we are," Seraphel explains, and her voice carries layers of emotion that the translation matrix renders as best it can, though the nuances are clearly being lost in the conversion from Vetheran linguistic patterns to human language. "We reproduce through parthenogenesis, a division of self that creates new life from the completion of specific biological cycles. We have no need for what you represent. We require no external genetic material. We are complete unto ourselves." Yet even as she speaks these words, her gaze never leaves Marcus. In her multifaceted eyes, he sees something shifting, something awakening, a recognition of possibility that seems to trouble her even as she denies its necessity. The surrounding Vetherans begin moving closer, their movements no longer coordinated in the precise formation they maintained earlier, but instead becoming individual, autonomous, driven by curiosity that seems to override whatever protocols might normally govern their interaction with strangers. Marcus realizes with growing alarm that they are studying him with an intensity that feels increasingly invasive. Hands reach out to touch his suit, running across its surface as if attempting to understand its composition and purpose through tactile sensation. Other hands move toward his hair, fascinated by its texture and structure. Some Vetherans lean close to his face, their multifaceted eyes focusing on his human features with an intensity that acutely aware of how alien his appearance must seem to them. Over the following several days that blur together in a haze of constant observation, endless questions, and the peculiar isolation of being simultaneously surrounded by beings and utterly alone in one's alienness, Marcus is escorted deeper into Vetheran territory. The journey leads him through passages in the forest that increasingly suggest intentional design and deliberate cultivation. The crystalline structures become more frequent, more elaborate, eventually forming pathways that guide his movement with subtle architectural suggestions rather than overt barriers. The Vetherans maintain a formation around him that never quite crosses the boundary into imprisonment, yet never quite achieves the openness of free movement. They arrive eventually at Lyrandor, which the Vetherans' collective linguistic patterns approximate to Marcus's translation matrix as the hard becoming, or perhaps the center of transformation. The actual Vetheran concept seems to encompass meanings that human language struggles to contain. The city is a marvel of biological architecture that challenges every assumption Marcus holds about urban design and structural engineering. The buildings seem grown rather than built, their walls composed of living wood that continues to photosynthesize and process nutrients from some internal source Marcus cannot identify. The structure integrates seamlessly with the ancient forest trees, creating a unified ecosystem where the boundary between constructed environment and natural world has been deliberately erased. The towers of Lyrandor reach toward the sky in spiraling formations that suggest either botanical randomness or an intentional aesthetics based on principles of harmony and balance that Marcus finds himself unable to fully articulate. The surfaces shimmer with bioluminescent patterns that change in response to day-night cycles and perhaps to the emotional states or activities of the inhabitants. Crystal formations jut from the earth and walls, their surfaces inscribed with patterns that Marcus's instruments suggest might be information storage systems based on quantum principles far beyond current human understanding. The entire city hums with a subtle vibration that Marcus feels through his suit, a resonance that seems to connect every structure to every other structure in an integrated whole. The Vetherans assign Marcus to quarters in a tower of polished stone and living wood, a chamber that is beautiful in its alien way, that Marcus immediately recognizes has been designed with careful attention to containment. The entry points can be sealed, he notes. The windows, while transparent, seem designed to transmit light while resisting penetration of larger objects. The communication systems available in the chamber allow outgoing transmission, but seem to be monitored in real time. Marcus maintains outward politeness while internally cataloging every detail of his quasi-imprisonment. Seraphel begins visiting him daily, her calls announced by patterns of bioluminescence that Marcus's instrument interpret as some form of electronic signal traveling through the building's structure. These visits are ostensibly cordial. Marcus detects an undercurrent of intensity that goes beyond casual diplomatic conversation. She asks questions through the translation matrix with what can only be described as desperate eagerness. Your species reproduces through what you call combination, through the physical union of two distinct individuals, creating a third entity. This is necessary for your species' continuation. Marcus attempts to explain human reproduction with the clinical precision his training allows, using anatomical terminology and genetic frameworks that he hopes will render the topic purely scientific. Yet he notices the effect of his words on Seraphel, even as the translation matrix struggles to convert human concepts into Vetheran linguistic patterns. Her skin begins to display more pronounced color shifts, her breathing becomes shallower, and her multifaceted eyes seem to focus with an intensity that suggests mental effort of significant magnitude. When other Vetherans attend these conversations, and increasingly, more of them do, detects similar physiological responses, there is undeniable scientific curiosity in their reactions. Yet Marcus recognizes an undercurrent of something else, something primal, instinctual, that makes his threat assessment protocols scream warnings that he tries to ignore. The revelation comes during Marcus's third week in Lyrandor, when Seraphel grants him access to what she describes, the archives of our people, ancient records stored in crystalline matrices that seem to exist in states that Marcus's instruments struggle to fully characterize. The storage systems allow him to interface directly with the historical data through his translation matrix, though the process is imperfect and sometimes leaves him with fragmentary understanding mixed with profound gaps in comprehension. Yet gradually, a historical narrative emerges from the ancient texts, a narrative that reshapes his understanding of Vetheran civilization. 3,000 years before the present moment, the Vetheran species was not exclusively female. The ancient records speak of males, of reproduction through sexual union, of genetic diversity born from the combination of distinct individuals' genetic material. But approximately 3,000 years ago, according to the Vetheran historical documents that Marcus deciphers with painstaking effort, the species underwent a catastrophic transformation. A biological plague swept through Vetheran civilization. The texts describe it with terminology that suggests it was both natural and possibly engineered. Pathogenic organism that targeted specifically male physiology with devastating precision. The plague killed with horrifying efficiency. The texts describe population collapses, the breakdown of social structures, the desperation of a species watching its males die in overwhelming numbers. Within a single generation, according to the records, every male of childbearing age had been eliminated, and a significant portion of the very young males had also perished. The Vetherans, facing extinction, adapted through a combination of evolutionary pressure and deliberate biological engineering that Marcus finds almost incomprehensible in its scope and sophistication. They developed the capacity for parthenogenesis, for self-reproduction, modifying their own genetic structure to create new generations without external male contribution. Yet the archives make clear that this transformation came at a cost. The texts speak of debate and resistance, of philosophers and scientists who warn that a species reproducing through parthenogenesis would suffer inevitable erosion of genetic diversity. Without the continuous shuffling of genetic material that sexual reproduction provides, mutations would accumulate, deleterious genes would concentrate, and the species would face inevitable decline as its adaptive capacity withered. The Vetheran solution was imperfect but pragmatic. They accepted that they would need to actively manage their genetic diversity through selective breeding, controlled mutation introduction, and deliberate genetic engineering. They would have to become the architects of their own evolution, intervening constantly to prevent the slow decline that pure parthenogenesis would inevitably produce. The documents make clear that this strategy has largely succeeded for 3,000 years, but the archives also contain something that chills Marcus when he finally understands it. Mathematical projections, genetic models, and demographic analysis that all point to a single, inescapable conclusion. The Vetheran civilization is approaching what the documents describe as the threshold of collapse, a point beyond which even constant intervention and deliberate genetic manipulation cannot maintain sufficient diversity to prevent species decline. The projections suggest that perhaps 500 years remain, perhaps only 200, before the rate of genetic corruption exceeds the rate of intervention, and the species begins to spiral into irreversible decline. Marcus cross-references this discovery with medical data team left behind at New Haven Station, running the numbers through human genetic analysis frameworks, comparing Vetheran biology to theoretical models of population genetics and evolutionary sustainability. The conclusion is unavoidable. The Vetherans are indeed facing extinction, not immediately but with mathematical certainty within the timespan of a few centuries. They have created a civilization and a culture that has persisted for 1,000 years in defiance of biological destiny. But that destiny has merely been postponed, not prevented. He sends a heavily encrypted message back to New Haven Station, outlining his findings and his growing concern about the Vetheran response to his presence. The response arrives within hours, sent by Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the colony's chief geneticist, and one of the few women Marcus has maintained any kind of cordial relationship with during his isolation at the station. Her message is both professional and tinged with personal concern. Marcus, if the Vetherans are facing genetic collapse, within the time span they perceive as culturally significant, they will inevitably view as a potential solution to their crisis. Be extremely careful. Do not allow yourself to become a resource to be exploited. Remember, you are not a breeding stock, regardless of how necessary they believe reproductive integration might be for species survival. You are a human being with rights and agency, and those rights supersede any species' need for genetic salvation. The warning crystallizes Marcus's growing sense of unease into something concrete and undeniable. He begins to notice patterns in how the Vetherans interact with him that he had been unconsciously rationalizing as mere cultural difference. Serafel is always present during his meals, watching him eat with an intensity that goes far beyond casual observation or anthropological interest. She seems to be studying his physiology, his appetite, his bodily functions with an attention to detail that Marcus realizes is designed to assess reproductive fitness and genetic quality. The other veterans he encounters touch him with increasing frequency, and their touches become progressively less ceremonial and more exploratory, as if they are attempting to understand the mechanics of his body through direct physical contact. During his 5th week in Leriandor, Marcus notices something else. The veteran social interactions around him have begun to shift in ways both subtle and profoundly disturbing. Female veterans who appear to be in or approaching reproductive maturity are increasingly present in his vicinity. Their clothing becomes more elaborate and more revealing of their physiology. They adopt postures that seem designed to present their bodies in ways that Marcus's psychology, shaped by 3 years of isolation among human women in New Haven Station, interprets as displays of reproductive fitness and sexual availability. When he attempts to ask direct questions about veteran reproduction and their reproductive cycles, the answers become evasive, cloaked in technical language that his translation matrix struggles to fully render into comprehensible concepts. Serafel speaks of genetic integration opportunities and reproductive partnership frameworks and biological compatibility assessments. She discusses the mechanisms of veteran parthenogenesis in detail, but becomes deliberately vague when Marcus pushes for clarity about what role she envisions for him in the veteran reproductive process. The turning point comes when Marcus discovers, through careful analysis of the building's structural patterns and electromagnetic emissions, that he is being kept in restricted quarters not for his safety, but control his movement and monitor his physiological responses. The hospitality he has been shown is revealed as containment when he attempts to leave his tower and finds the pathways sealed by what appear to be force fields or some other technological barrier that his instruments cannot fully characterize. Veteran guards, the first physical barriers to his movement that Marcus has encountered, position themselves at the sealed entrance with postures that make clear they will prevent his departure by force if necessary. Serafel appears before Marcus can escalate the confrontation, materializing from the tower's interior with a speed that suggests she has been nearby, waiting for him to attempt this exact action. She looks at him with what might be sadness, or possibly resignation, or perhaps something that exists in the emotional landscape between those two states. When she finally speaks, her voice carries harmonics that strip away all remaining pretense and diplomatic courtesy. "Our species is dying," she says, her words carrying the weight of 3,000 years of carefully managed decline. Not quickly, perhaps not within a single lifetime, perhaps not even within 5 or 6 human generations, but the mathematics of our biology are inexorable and utterly inescapable. Each generation is slightly less genetically diverse than the previous one. The mutations accumulate. The beneficial genetic variants concentrate in narrower populations. The adaptive capacity diminishes with each cycle of reproduction. We are approaching what our geneticists call the threshold of collapse, beyond which our species cannot recover. No matter how much intervention we attempt, no matter how sophisticated our genetic engineering becomes. She pauses, and her mulcted eyes seem to focus all their light and perception on Marcus with an intensity that goes beyond anything she has previously demonstrated. "We discovered your colony through our atmospheric monitors. The energy signature of your vessels is distinctive, and we began tracking your movements with great interest. When we detected your presence as a discrete individual aboard your vessel, a biosignature pattern, unlike anything else in your colony, we understood something that filled us with both terror and hope. We understood that the universe was offering us something that 3,000 years of engineering could never replicate. A source of genetic material from an entirely separate evolutionary lineage, from a species that has reproduced through sexual combination for its entire existence, and therefore the genetic diversity that our own species desperately requires. You're asking me to..." Marcus begins, but Serafel raises a hand and continues without allowing him to finish his sentence. "Not asking," she says, and her voice contains harmonics that suggest she understands the significance of this word choice. "Petitioning, beseeching, requesting with all the desperation that a dying species can muster. We have approximately 200 females in our immediate population who are in or approaching reproductive maturity. Our species would be fundamentally and forever transformed by genetic combination with yours. You could save us, Marcus Chen. You could give us back 3,000 years of time and catastrophe took away. You could provide the genetic diversity that will allow us to continue as a species, to maintain consciousness and culture and civilization, rather than declining into inevitable extinction. The proposition hangs in the air between them like a physical presence, heavy with implication and moral complexity. Marcus recognizes that Seraphel is not being deliberately cruel or deceptive in her intent. From a perspective, from the framework of Vetheran consciousness, shaped by 3,000 years of slow decline, she is offering him a role of cosmic significance. She is asking him to participate in species salvation, to use his biological capabilities in service of a greater good. But Marcus also recognizes, with absolute clarity, what she is describing regardless of her intentions or her emotional sincerity: reproductive coercion. She is asking him to surrender his bodily autonomy, to become a biological resource to be deployed in service of another species' survival, to surrender his agency and consent in the face of an argument that his sacrifice is necessary for a species' continuation. Marcus feels something crystallize within him, clarity born of violation and the recognition that some lines, once crossed, create damage that cannot be healed. "I don't accept," he says, and he speaks with words that emerge from a place deeper than his conscious mind, a place that understands instinctively that bodily autonomy is not a privilege to be surrendered under the pressure of external necessity. "I refuse. I am not a biological solution to be deployed in service of your species' survival. My humanity is not a resource to be exploited. My body is not a tool for genetic integration, regardless of how necessary you believe that integration might be. No species' survival, no matter how essential, no matter how dire the circumstances, justifies the elimination of another individual's agency and choice. This is a line that I will not cross, and if crossing it is necessary for your species' survival, then your species will have to find another path forward." Seraphel's expression cycles through emotions that Marcus's psychology struggles to fully interpret. There is disappointment, certainly, and something that might be anger or frustration. But there is also something that looks almost like respect, as if she recognizes in Marcus's refusal some quality that speaks to her despite her species' desperate need. "Then we must take a different path," she says quietly, and Marcus hears in her voice the sound of a decision being made, a decision that he will understand far too late to prevent its implementation. The events that follow unfold with the precision of long-considered plans, contingencies prepared in advance, and now being activated because the primary strategy has failed. Seraphel withdraws from the chamber, and Marcus is immediately surrounded by Vetheran guards, whose postures have shifted from neutral to overtly aggressive. He attempts to fight, drawing upon training that suddenly seems inadequate against beings whose physiology is demonstrably superior to his own. They are faster than him, stronger than him. They're coordinated despite being separate individuals rather than a unified consciousness. They subdue him with an efficiency that suggests this outcome was anticipated, prepared for, perhaps even practiced. Marcus is transported to a facility deeper within Lurandor, a place of controlled environments and sealed barriers that appears designed specifically for the purpose of containing and studying biological specimens. The Vetheran scientists begin their work immediately, attempting to harvest genetic material through methods that range from merely uncomfortable to actively agonizing. They try to sedate him with chemical compounds that his human physiology processes differently than Vetheran substances, creating effects that the scientists did not anticipate. Marcus fights, and he manages to access his emergency communication device before they can fully secure him. His message to New Haven Station is brief and carries the weight of violated agency: reproductive coercion, biological imprisonment, involuntary genetic integration being prepared. I am being contained without consent for scientific reproduction protocols. Initiate Protocol 7. Repeat, initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 is the colony's nuclear option, the military response carefully designed to be used only in circumstances of existential threat. It involves deploying the orbital defense systems maintained by New Haven Station to bombard specific coordinates with precision strikes designed to minimize civilian casualties while eliminating perceived threats to colonial security. Marcus knows that sending this message commits him to a course of action with consequences that will ripple across two species and reshape the future of Vethara Prime. He knows that his message will trigger military response, weapons discharge, and destruction on a scale that will be difficult to contain or control. He sends the message anyway, because he recognizes that some violations of autonomy cannot be resolved through compromise or negotiation. Some violations can only be answered through force. But before the orbital response can materialize and rain destruction upon Lyrandor, something unexpected happens, something that reshapes the moral landscape of the moment with unexpected complexity. The Vetheran population, which has seemed monolithic and unified in its acceptance of Seraphel's plan, fractures into discord. Not all of them agree with the Elder's strategy. A younger Vetheran named Lyris, who has been independent research into human cultural records and philosophical frameworks, emerges as the voice of resistance. She has been studying human texts on autonomy and rights, learning about human concepts of consent and bodily integrity, and she finds herself unable to reconcile the species' desperation with the moral cost of the solution being proposed. She understands that achieving species survival through violation of another being's agency is a victory purchased with corruption of principle, a salvation that transforms the saved into something lesser than what they were. Lyris organizes a faction of Vetherans who believe there must be another path: genetic therapy, biological engineering, scientific collaboration, or acceptance of the species' inevitable transformation into something new. The conflict between Seraphel's faction and Lyris's rebellion creates fissures in Vetheran society that have not existed for thousands of years. Seraphel insists with fierce intensity that choosing morality over species survival is a luxury only civilizations facing abundance can afford. Ethical frameworks are privileges of the privileged, that survival supersedes all other considerations. Lyris counters that a species that preserves itself through violation of another being's agency deserves to transform into something new, that some principles cannot be compromised without losing the essence, what makes life worth preserving. The debate rages through the crystalline halls of Lyrandor, echoing off the ancient trees, splitting the previously unified Vetheran consciousness into irreconcilable fragments. Marcus, confined in his chamber, hears the arguments through the building's acoustic systems. Here's the passion and the desperation and the principled resistance playing out in a civilization struggling with its own moral identity. The orbital strikes arrive with terrible precision. Weapons systems controlled by New Haven Station's military command calculate trajectories and firing solutions designed to eliminate the containment facility and the immediate infrastructure of Lyrandor's scientific district without extending destruction into the broader city or the natural forest. The destruction is surgical but devastating precision weapons that annihilate the facility where Marcus was being held and the surrounding complex with efficiency that speaks to humanity's capacity for directed violence. The message is clear to both species. Humanity will not tolerate the exploitation of its representatives, but humanity will also show restraint and discrimination in its response. This is not an extinction strike. This is a demonstration of capability and a warning against future violations. As Marcus's extraction shuttle descends from the clouds, he watches Seraphel's faction scatter. Seraphel herself stands at the edge of the destruction, watching the ruins of what might have been the future of her species smoldering against the Vetheran sky. Marcus sees Lyris's people moving with deliberate purpose through the devastation, salvaging what they can from the ruins, beginning the process of rebuilding not just physical structures, but the ideological framework that had been shattered by the conflict. The climax reaches its final turning point when Marcus, aboard the shuttle and already ascending toward orbital space, makes a decision that surprises everyone who learns of it. Rather than returning directly to New Haven Station, he requests a brief communication window with Seraphel. When the Elder's image appears before him through the shuttle's communication screen, Bearing the marks of her experience in the conflict and the destruction, Marcus speaks words that have been forged in the fire of violation and fear, but are delivered with unexpected compassion born from understanding. Your species is not facing extinction because you need me, he tells Seraphel, and his voice carries no anger, only sadness and the weight of hard-won understanding. Your species is facing transformation because that is the nature of all living things. Because extinction is the universe's default destination for all species eventually, because permanence is an illusion that evolution itself disproves. But transformation doesn't have to mean destruction. If you are willing to approach humanity as equals, as partners in mutual survival, rather than as a genetic resource to be exploited, there might be another path. I cannot be what you asked me to be. But humans, as a species, might be willing to be something else: allies, collaborators, friends in the long struggle against entropy and inevitable decline. Seraphel's multifaceted eyes seem to contract and expand, as though processing information at scales beyond normal comprehension. When she finally responds, her voice carries harmonics of acceptance mixed with loss and the beginning of something new. You are right. I understand now the nature of the mistake we made, and the cost will be borne by my species for generations to come. Survival purchased with another being's suffering is not survival at all. It is merely postponing death while transforming it into something more complex and more terrible. We have chosen poorly, and we will have to live with the consequences of that choice. But perhaps, as you suggest, the consequences need not be final. The weeks following the orbital strikes transform into months of complex negotiation, unexpected collaboration, and the painful process of rebuilding trust between species that have nearly destroyed each other. Marcus returns to New Haven Station to discover that his message has created a firestorm of debate among the human colonists. Many of the women, particularly those who lost partners in the cryosleep failure that made Marcus the sole surviving male, demand retribution. They view the Vetheran attempt at reproductive coercion as an existential threat to humanity's future on Vethara Prime, as evidence that any trust placed in alien species is foolish and naive. The military command structure, energized by the success of Protocol 7, begins developing contingency plans for potential conflict scenarios, approaches focused on maintaining human military advantage and strategic superiority. Yet others within the colony, particularly Dr. Okonkwo and her research team, see the incident differently. They argue that what occurred was a tragic misunderstanding born from desperation, that the Vetharan's actions were morally wrong but comprehensible within the context of species collapse, and that the incident provides an unprecedented opportunity for genuine cross-species cooperation. They advocate for negotiation, for cultural exchange, for the development of scientific collaboration that might benefit both species. The debate within New Haven Station becomes heated, passionate, and ultimately divisive in ways that force the colony to confront its own values and principles. Marcus becomes the focal point of both factions' arguments. Those advocating for military vigilance point to his violation as evidence of Vetheran untrustworthiness. Those advocating for cooperation point to his survival and his willingness to communicate with Seraphel as evidence that understanding is possible. Caught between these opposing perspectives, Marcus finds himself doing something unexpected. He advocates for forgiveness, not forgetting, not pretending that what happened was acceptable, but acknowledging that Seraphel acted from desperation rather than malice, and that genuine forgiveness might create the foundation for healing and collaboration. The Vetheran factions reconcile through a process that is painful, difficult, and ultimately transformative. Seraphel, rather than being rejected or punished by her people, becomes the primary advocate for change within Vetheran society. She publicly acknowledges the mistake and confronts the moral failure that motivated it. She accepts responsibility for the attempted coercion and begins working toward restoration and redemption. Lyris, the younger Vetheran who led the resistance, emerges as a bridge builder, establishing a commission dedicated to exploring alternatives to species collapse. This commission is tasked with investigating genetic therapy, biological engineering, and scientific cooperation with humanity. Marcus accepts a formal position as the liaison between New Haven Station and Larendor, working to establish protocols for cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, and mutual benefit. He meets regularly with both Serafel and Leiris, facilitating conversations about genetic analysis, reproductive biology, and the philosophical questions that underlie both species' understanding of survival and identity. The colony begins sharing scientific knowledge, particularly in fields like genetics and molecular biology, allowing veteran researchers to explore novel approaches to their species' evolutionary crisis. Surprisingly, the most significant development emerges from research conducted by veteran scientists using human genetic frameworks and analysis techniques. Deep within the oldest sections of the forest, in biological archives that predate even the written historical records, researchers discover preserved genetic material biological samples stored in crystalline matrices that have maintained their integrity for thousands of years. The material predates the plague by millennia and includes traces of male genetic sequences that have been preserved through some unknown preservation technique that combines veteran biotechnology with biological principles that human science has not yet fully understood. The discovery suggests that salvation might come not from external genetic input, but from within veteran history itself. The ancient genetic material might, with careful analysis and sophisticated biofabrication techniques, allow the veterans to recover aspects of their lost biological diversity without requiring external genetic input or ongoing sexual partnership with humans. The possibility is tantalizing but uncertain. The genetic material is degraded, incomplete, and recovery would require technology the veterans would need human assistance to develop and deploy. Marcus watches as the veteran civilization begins to transform in ways that few could have predicted. Some females begin to experiment with genetic engineering to reintroduce male phenotypes into their population, not through reproductive partnership with Marcus or other humans, but through careful manipulation of their own genome, using ancient genetic sequences recovered from the archives. Other veterans remain committed to the traditional parthenogenetic reproduction, but work to optimize the genetic diversity of their offspring through a variety of biological techniques developed through collaboration with human geneticists. Still others strike a middle path, exploring limited genetic contribution from human volunteers in a carefully controlled framework that prioritizes consent, ethical review, and mutual benefit. The human colony also transforms. Marcus's experience triggers profound reflection among the colonists about their own species and their own survival strategies. Some members of the colony become dedicated to veteran human-human scientific collaboration, seeing the partnership as essential to ensuring both species' long-term survival and cultural flourishing. Others begin to question whether humanity's approach to settling alien worlds requires recalibration. The implicit assumption that humans have the right to reshape environments and relationships according to our needs is challenged by colonists who recognize that ethical extraterrestrial civilization demands restraint, cooperation, and willingness to accept limitations on human expansion and exploitation. Dr. Okonkwo becomes the director of the Joint Veteran Human Research Initiative, overseeing projects that benefit both species while maintaining rigorous ethical standards. Her team works with veteran scientists on genetic sequencing projects, biological archaeology, and the development of new biotechnologies that neither species could have created independently. The collaboration produces advances in genetic medicine that benefit both populations, creates new frameworks for understanding the evolutionary process, and builds interpersonal relationships that bridge the gap between species. The immediate practical result of these developments is the signing of the Vetharaprime Treaty, a document establishing the planet as a shared world with distinct territories allocated to human and veteran civilizations, with overlapping zones designated for joint research, cultural exchange, and scientific collaboration. Trade begins to flow between New Haven Station and Lyrandor, with humans providing technological expertise in genetic science while veterans offer their profound knowledge of the planet's biosphere. Their advanced understanding of biological systems, operating on principles that predate human evolution, and their own technological innovations in areas where human civilization has not yet begun to explore. Marcus himself chooses to remain on Vethara Prime as ambassador, a role that transforms him from an isolated survivor into a connector between worlds. He establishes a residence in a neutral zone between New Haven Station and Lyranador, maintaining connections to both communities while belonging fully to neither. The isolation that characterized his life at the station been replaced by meaningful engagement with both species. His work involves cultural documentation, scientific collaboration, and the daily practice of helping two intelligent species learn to coexist and cooperate despite their profound differences. He and Lyris develop a relationship that transcends mere professional collaboration. Working closely together, they form a partnership of intellectual and emotional depth, sharing knowledge and perspectives, learning from each other's species different approaches to understanding the universe. Their relationship becomes symbolic of what might be possible when different species approach each other with genuine openness and respect. Yet the resolution carries notes of bittersweet complexity that prevent it from feeling like a simple happy ending. The incident leaves scars on both populations that will not heal easily or quickly. Many humans remain suspicious of Vetheran intentions, viewing the reproductive coercion as evidence of fundamental alien immorality. They argue for continued military vigilance and the maintenance of systems designed to prevent future exploitation. Some Vetherans, particularly Seraphel's generation, struggle with the knowledge that their species cannot be saved by external intervention. Their transformation will require accepting loss and change in ways that challenge their deepest assumptions about identity and continuity. The genetic material recovered from the ancient archive offers hope, but no guarantees. The process of reintegrating male phenotypes into Vetheran production is experimental, uncertain, and filled with ethical questions that have no clear answers. Some Vetherans welcome the possibility of reintroducing males into their population. Others fear the social disruption that such a change might produce. The scientific challenges are equally significant. The recovered genetic material is incomplete, and successfully using it requires technologies that scientists from both species must develop together, working through differences in approach and understanding. 5 years after the initial contact in the forest, Marcus stands in an observatory in Lyrandor, watching the dual sunset of Vethara Prime paint the sky in colors that human language has not yet developed words to describe. Beside him stands a young being who represents both species and neither, a child born from a carefully supervised and fully controlled partnership between a human volunteer from New Haven Station and a young Vetheran female. The union was undertaken not as an emergency measure for species survival, but as a deliberate scientific experiment to understand the genetic possibilities of cross-species reproduction when approached with care, consent, and scientific rigor. The child's name is Meridian, a name chosen to represent a point of connection between two different coordinate systems. Meridian has eyes that blend the multifaceted architecture of Vetheran sight with something that echoes human warmth and focus. Her skin displays patterns that shift through colors that neither parent species naturally displays. Her physiology reflects an unexpected genetic harmony, suggesting that humans and Vetherans, despite their profound differences, may share enough genetic commonality to produce viable offspring. She represents both species and neither, a living symbol of the complex future that Marcus has helped to create. "Do you think it will work?" Meridian asks Marcus as they watch the sunset, her voice carrying harmonics of both Vetheran and something almost human in its acoustic properties. The genetic integration, the reintroduction of male phenotypes, the partnership between our species. Will we really be able to transform without losing ourselves? Marcus considers the question carefully, aware that he is being asked to provide wisdom he is not certain he possesses. "I think," he says slowly, choosing his words with deliberate precision, "whether it works depends entirely on how we define success. If success means the Vetheran species remains unchanged, maintaining its biological and cultural continuity exactly as it exists in this moment, then no integration will be uncomfortable and transformative. Your species will change fundamentally, and some Vetherans will experience that change as loss. But if success means creating something new, a civilization that honors its past while embracing an unpredictable future, a species that grows and adapts and evolves while maintaining its essential values and identity, then perhaps we have already begun to succeed. The answer is deliberately ambiguous, reflecting the true complexity of the situation. As Marcus speaks, his communication device alerts him to an incoming message from New Haven Station. The colony has made contact with a second alien civilization on the far side of Vethara Prime species that appears to be entirely sentient, demonstrating intelligence comparable to, or perhaps exceeding that of both humans and Vetharans. The civilization is organized according to principles that human and Vetheran science has not yet fully understood, and may represent humanity's most significant encounter with alien intelligence yet. His expertise in first contact protocols is being requested urgently. His role as bridge builder is expanding in ways he could never have anticipated when he first entered the forest. As he prepares to depart Lirner and return to New Haven Station to prepare for this new contact, Marcus glances back at Meridian and the sprawling city behind her. The lights of Lirendor begin to activate as twilight deepens, creating a display of bioluminescence that represents 3,000 years of Vetheran civilization coexisting uneasily with the possibility of profound transformation. He carries with him no certainties, only the hard-won knowledge that survival, for any species, demands more than biological continuity. It demands wisdom, compassion, and the willingness to accept fundamental transformation. Whether humanity and the Vetherans can sustain this partnership as complications inevitably arise remains unknown. Whether this new civilization emerging from both species will ultimately thrive or face its own catastrophic challenges lies hidden in futures that no present moment can predict. Marcus steps into the shuttle, his mind already racing with questions about the new alien contact awaiting discovery beyond the horizon, his heart carrying the weight and wonder of the journey that has brought him to this moment. Behind him, Vethara Prime continues its eternal rotation, and before him the unknown stretches vast and infinite, waiting to be encountered, understood, and transformed by the meeting of worlds.